There was a 1996 Toyota Land Cruiser in Bozeman, Montana, with 541,000 miles on the original engine. Not a rebuilt engine, not a replacement block sourced from a salvage yard. The original 1FZ FI inline 6 that left the factory in Tahara, Japan, was bolted to the original transmission and has started every single morning for 28 years. In a state where winter temperatures drop to -30 and the roads leading to the owner's property are classified as unmaintained. The owner, a cattle rancher who has driven it to job sites through creek crossings and across terrain that would end most vehicles in a single season, has never done anything extraordinary to that truck. No exotic oil additives. No expensive supplements, no modifications. What he has done, without exception, from the day he bought it, is follow a set of habits so consistent and so specific that the truck has simply never been given a reason to fail. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. Because when people hear about a 500,000-mile Toyota, the instinct is to attribute it to luck, or to the vehicle's innate Japanese engineering superiority, or to some combination of factors outside the owner's control. And while Toyota's engineering philosophy genuinely deserves credit, the conservatism built into their tolerance specs, the thermal management thinking embedded in their engine designs, the obsessive validation testing that every platform undergoes before production, the engineering only explains the ceiling. It explains how high the car can go if everything goes right. What determines whether it actually gets there is every decision the owner makes from the first mile to the last. This is the story of those decisions. All of them. In the order they matter. Most Toyota owners don't start thinking seriously about long-term maintenance until the first warning light appears, or until a shop tells them something needs attention, or until the car hits 100,000 miles and suddenly feels like it has crossed some psychological threshold into high-mileage territory. By that point, the most important window in the car's entire service life has already closed. The first 50,000 miles are where the engine's wear destiny gets written. Here's the mechanical reality. Modern engines, even Toyota's most robust platforms, have moving parts operating under tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The crankshaft journals ride on bearing surfaces separated from the crank by a film of pressurized oil that, at operating speed, is thinner than a human hair. The cylinder walls, the piston rings, the camshaft lobes, all of them are in a process of microscopic wear from the first cold start. That wear is not avoidable, it is manageable, and how aggressively it accumulates in the first 50,000 miles determines what condition the engine's critical clearances are in when the car reaches 150,000, 200,000, and beyond. The single most destructive event in an engine's early life is cold start abuse. And it happens every single day to millions of vehicles whose owners have never been told why it matters. When a Toyota 2GR FE V6 or a 2AR FE 4-cylinder sits overnight, in ambient temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the oil in the sump drains off the upper engine components and settles in the pan. The oil also thickens significantly with the cold. A 5W30 oil at 20 degrees Fahrenheit flows with a viscosity closer to 30 weight than 5 weight, regardless of what the label says. The W in the viscosity rating stands for winter, not weight, and it represents the oil's cold flow behavior. How quickly it circulates when cold, not how protective it is when cold. In the first 8 to 15 seconds after a cold start, before oil pressure fully builds, before the oil has circulated to the upper valve train, the camshaft lobes and rocker arms on many Toyota engines are running on residual film only. This is normal and unavoidable. What is avoidable is loading the engine during those 15 seconds. Every time a cold Toyota is started and immediately driven hard, full throttle from a residential street, aggressive acceleration onto a highway on-ramp, sustained high RPM before the coolant temperature gauge has moved, the wear rate during that critical unlubricated window multiplies. Across 50,000 miles of cold start abuse, the cumulative effect on bearing clearances and cylinder wall geometry is measurable and irreversible. The clearances open up, the oil consumption creeps up, the compression numbers drift down. None of it is dramatic in any single event. All of it is compounding. The owners whose Toyotas reach 500,000 miles overwhelmingly share one habit from the very beginning of ownership. They do not push a cold engine, not because they read it in a manual, because they understood, or were told early enough, that the engine running at idle for 60 to 90 seconds before any load application is not wasted time. It is the highest return maintenance habit in the entire ownership arc, and it costs nothing except the willingness to wait 90 seconds before driving normally. Paired with that is oil interval discipline during the first 50,000 miles that goes beyond what the maintenance minder typically recommends. On a brand new Toyota, changing the oil at 4,000 miles. For the first 2 or 3 changes, even if the system says 7,500 is acceptable, removes the microscopic metallic particles generated during initial wear-in before they can circulate through the engine and act as abrasive contamination in the oil film. This is not a permanent recommendation. After the first 15,000 to 20,000 miles, the wear-in phase is complete, and the factory-recommended interval with a quality full synthetic is entirely appropriate. But the early changes are cheap insurance on an engine that is still settling into its operating geometry. And the Toyotas that reach extreme mileage almost always have owners who understood this intuitively or learned it before it was too late. The first 50,000 miles are not where most people lose their engine. They're where the conditions are created that determine how the engine handles the next 200,000. Treat that window as the foundation. Every decision after it builds on what was laid here. Between 80,000 and 180,000 miles, Toyota ownership splits into two very different trajectories, and the split is almost never about the car. This is the window where deferred maintenance compounds, where the small, cheap services that got skipped at 60,000 and 70,000 miles because the car seemed fine, begin to extract their actual cost, where the difference between a Toyota that makes 300,000 miles and one that gets traded in with a rough idle and a transmission that slips reveals itself. Not as a manufacturing difference, but as a maintenance difference accumulated across years of small decisions. The components that define this window are specific: the coolant system, the transmission fluid, the timing system on interference engines, and the thing almost nobody talks about, the positive crankcase ventilation system. Start with coolant. Toyota's long-life coolant, the pink SLLC fluid used in most post-2004 Toyotas, is rated for 100,000 miles or 10 years before its first change. That rating is accurate for the anti-freeze protection the coolant provides. It is not an accurate description of the coolant's buffering capacity, its ability to maintain a neutral pH and prevent acidic corrosion of the aluminum components in Toyota's cooling system. The buffering capacity of most long-life coolants begins degrading meaningfully around 80,000 to 90,000 miles, even when the freeze protection still tests at the correct level. An owner who tests their coolant with a simple freeze point test strip and concludes, "It's fine," is testing the wrong thing. The right test is a pH strip or a voltmeter check for electrolytic activity in the coolant. Acidic or electrolytically active coolant is attacking the aluminum water pump housing, the head, gasket sealing surfaces, and the heater core from the inside, silently and continuously, with every thermal cycle. The Toyotas that develop head gasket issues, water pump failures, and heater core leaks in the 120,000 to 160,000 mile range overwhelmingly trace back to coolant that was chemically depleted long before it was changed. The fix is a coolant drain and refill at 80,000 to 90,000 miles, regardless of what the maintenance schedule says, followed by changes every 50,000 miles thereafter. The cost is between $80 and $120 at an independent shop. The water pump, head gasket repair, and heater core replacement, it prevents collectively cost between $1,800 and $4,500. The transmission fluid situation is equally consequential and equally misunderstood. Toyota's official position on many of their automatic transmissions, the A350E, the U6 and SCTE, the AA80E, has historically listed the transmission fluid as a lifetime fill requiring no scheduled change. This is one of the most expensive pieces of official documentation Toyota has ever produced for its owners, because lifetime in that context means the lifetime of the fluid under ideal laboratory conditions, not the lifetime of a transmission in a vehicle driven in the real world with real heat cycles and real contamination. Transmission fluid in a Toyota automatic that has never been changed at 100,000 miles is fluid that has been shearing its viscosity modifier package for a decade, accumulating fine metallic particles from clutch pack wear, and losing its oxidation resistance through repeated thermal cycling. The owners who change their Toyota transmission fluid at 60,000 miles and every 40,000 miles thereafter, using Toyota Genuine ATF or a verified OEM equivalent, are not doing unnecessary maintenance. They are directly extending the service life of a transmission that costs between $3,500 and $5,800 to replace. The Toyotas at 400,000 and 500,000 miles with original transmissions are the ones whose owners never believed the lifetime fill claim. And then there's the PCV system, the positive crankcase ventilation system that almost no maintenance guide mentions until it has already failed. The PCV valve on Toyota 4-cylinder and V6 engines is a $1 part that controls the flow of crankcase gases back into the intake manifold for combustion. When it sticks closed, crankcase pressure builds, pushes past seals, and creates oil leaks at the valve cover, rear main seal, and oil pan gasket that look expensive but trace back to a component that costs $8 and takes 4 minutes to replace. When it sticks open, raw oil vapor floods the intake manifold, coats the intake valves and throttle body with carbon deposits, and causes the rough idle and hesitation that shops routinely misdiagnose as injector failures or throttle body issues. Replace the PCV valve at every 60,000 mile interval. It is the most neglected $8 service item in Toyota ownership, and one of the most consequential. The middle miles are not a minefield. They are a test of whether the habits established in the first 50,000 miles carried through. The Toyotas that fail in this window fail because something essential was skipped when the car seemed too healthy to need attention. The Toyotas that sail through this window into 200,000 miles with tight engines. And smooth transmissions do so because their owners treated preventive maintenance as a system, not a reaction to symptoms. Somewhere around 150,000 to 180,000 miles, a psychological shift happens in most Toyota owners, and the direction of that shift determines everything that follows. The first shift, the one that ends most cars, is the mental accounting that begins to treat repair. Costs as money spent on a car that isn't worth it anymore. The logic sounds reasonable on the surface. The car is 10 or 12 years old, it needs a water pump, maybe the struts are worn, there's a small oil seep at the rear main, and the instinct is to add those costs up, compare them against a car payment, and conclude that the Toyota is becoming a liability. This is almost always the wrong conclusion, and the financial math behind it is almost always done incorrectly. The owners whose Toyotas reach 300,000 miles have made a different calculation. They have understood, sometimes explicitly, sometimes just intuitively, that the cost of maintaining a Toyota that is already paid off, already depreciated, and already known to them in its specific quirks and history is almost never more expensive than the alternative. A water pump replacement on a 2007 Camry costs $380 at an independent shop. A monthly payment on a replacement vehicle costs $480 to $650 every month for the next 6 years. The water pump is not a sign the car is dying. It is a sign the car has been running long enough for a wear component to reach the end of its service life, exactly as designed. Replacing it is not throwing money at a lost cause. It is performing a $380 intervention on a vehicle whose remaining useful life, properly maintained, is measured in hundreds of thousands of additional miles. The second shift, the one that gets cars to 300,000, is learning to distinguish between wear items and structural failures. Every high-mileage vehicle requires the former. Almost none of the 300,000-mile Toyotas on the road have experienced the latter. Struts, motor mounts, accessory belts, cooling hoses, brake hardware. These are components designed with finite service lives. Their replacement is not a symptom of a failing car. It is the maintenance cost of a car that has been driven long enough to wear through its consumable components. The structural elements of a Toyota, the block, the crank, the head, the transmission case, the frame, are built to tolerances and material specifications that, properly lubricated and cooled, will outlast every wear item on the car multiple times over. The owners at 300,000 miles have a relationship with their Toyota that looks less like consumer ownership and more like stewardship. They know the car's specific history. They know what was replaced and when. They have a mechanic they trust, typically an independent shop specializing in Japanese vehicles, who knows the car's file and can distinguish between a repair that is genuinely necessary and a service that is being recommended prematurely. They do not make decisions about the car based on its age or its mileage. They make decisions based on its actual condition and its documented history. That distinction is everything. Past 300,000 miles on a well-maintained Toyota, something happens that surprises almost everyone who experiences it for the first time. The car becomes predictable in a way that newer vehicles never are. Every wear item that has a finite service life has already been replaced at least once, some of them twice. The cooling system has been flushed and refilled multiple times with fresh chemistry. The transmission fluid has been changed on a disciplined schedule and carries none of the contamination that degrades clutch pack performance. The engine's adaptive memory has been reset cleanly after every major service. The PCV system is functioning, the seals are fresh, the belts and hoses are known quantities, there are no mysteries left. The owner of a 300,000-mile Toyota knows exactly what is in that car, what has been done to it, and what is due next. That knowledge is worth more than any extended warranty ever sold. The maintenance cadence past 300,000 miles simplifies rather than intensifies. Oil changes at the correct interval with a quality full synthetic, Toyota's own 0.20 for most post-2010 platforms, or a verified equivalent meeting the ILSAC GF6 specification. Coolant changes every 50,000 miles. Transmission fluid every 40,000. Brake fluid every 2 years, because brake fluid is hygroscopic and absorbs moisture from the atmosphere regardless of mileage. And degraded brake fluid corrodes master cylinder and caliper bore surfaces from the inside. Spark plugs on iridium-tipped platforms at 100,000-mile intervals. No sooner, no later. And continuous attention to the one indicator that tells you more about engine health than any other single measurement, the oil consumption rate between changes. A Toyota engine consuming less than 1 quart per 3,000 miles is an engine in acceptable health regardless of mileage. An engine that suddenly begins consuming more oil than it did the previous interval especially if the change is abrupt rather than gradual, is communicating something specific. Increased oil consumption past 300,000 miles typically indicates one of three things: worn valve stem seals allowing oil to be drawn into the combustion chamber, worn piston rings permitting blow-by past the cylinder walls, or PCV system failure causing oil vapor to enter the intake. The first two are genuine mechanical wear events. The third is an $8 fix. Identifying which one is happening through a compression test and a leak down test is a $6 diagnostic procedure. The owners who cross 400,000 and 500,000 miles are the ones who respond to that change in oil consumption immediately, rather than watching it worsen over 20,000 miles. There is one more thing that every extreme mileage Toyota owner will tell you, unprompted, when you ask them what they attribute the car's longevity to. It comes up in forums, in owner interviews, in the comment sections of videos about high mileage vehicles. It is not a maintenance tip. It is not a product recommendation. It is a philosophy. They never stopped paying attention. Not after 100,000 miles when the car felt proven. Not after 200,000 when it felt legendary. Not after 300,000 when it felt invincible. The car never became background noise to them. They noticed when the idle sounded slightly different on a cold morning. They noticed when the shift between second and third gear felt marginally less crisp than it had the week before. They noticed the smell of something burning off during the first 5 minutes of a cold start that hadn't been there the previous winter. Small signals, early warnings, the kind of information that costs nothing to act on at the moment it appears and thousands of dollars to address after it has been ignored for 6 months. The rancher in Bozeman with the 541,000-mile Land Cruiser was asked once what the secret was. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said something that sounds simple until you sit with it long enough to understand what it actually means. He said he just never treated it like it was disposable. That's the whole thing. Every 500,000-mile Toyota on the road right now, every Land Cruiser, every Camry, every Corolla and Tundra and 4Runner that has somehow outlasted everything the road could throw at it, exists because someone made that same decision. Not once. Not at the beginning when the car was new and the commitment was easy. Every single time the question came up across 20 or 30 years of ownership, the answer was the same. Not disposable. Not yet. Not ever. The engineering gives you the ceiling. The habits determine whether you reach it. And the habits, it turns out, are not complicated. They are just consistent, patient, attentive, repeated without exception from the first cold start to the last mile. That is the entire distance between 150,000 and 500,000. Not luck, not magic, not a special engine, just the decision, made every single day, to keep paying attention.